Um, Hello, everyone. Can you hear me fine? Hello? Hello? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks all for joining us today. It's an early morning in DC, but maybe even in some of the other regions. Today we have as our guest speaker Dr. Rocio Carrero from University College London, right, and City Lab. And she will be talking about the research on informal governance systems in cities. About 30 minutes presentation we will have, and then we will have 20 minutes for questions and answers. But in the meantime, if you have a burning question, please use the chat box, and we can still stop and answer the questions, I believe. After that, we will also have a 10-minute update from Ian from GDPC on a relevant topic on city coalitions that GDPC is developing and testing in the South Asia region. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Rocio. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you so much, Ainur, and thanks to the American Red Cross for inviting me today. I am really excited to be here, and I'm representing a full team at UCL, the City Lab, with many other people, as you can see at the bottom. So I'm just the voice today, but we're really lucky to work with a bigger team. And today, I will be presenting an ongoing work research that we are doing on informal networks for disaster risk reduction, with a focus on the urban scale. Just to give you a bit of background, why this project has started, I have been working with disaster risk reduction projects in over a dozen countries for the last 8 years, and working hand by hand with civil protection and emergency teams. I think that everyone knows better than I do that there are different systems that work at the same time when a disaster or crisis strikes, and the informal ones are definitely fundamental, but also very tricky to understand and to work with because they are quite chaotic. So with that in mind, we decided to make a piece of research to generate some evidence on how these systems might work during disaster situations. And please, as Ainur said, please feel free to ask me any questions during the presentation. Well, first of all, what happens when a disaster strikes? You will know that there is one side, which is, let's say, the official, the formal side, which includes the government, but also humanitarian agencies or other governments. And this response is very well organized, is prepared in advance. Okay, sorry about that. However, on the other side, we do have people. People always manage to organize themselves spontaneously. No matter where a disaster strikes, we will have these spontaneous responses at all sort of scales. And they're vital and fundamental, as I said before, to cope with the disaster, either in the short and in the longer term. So if we have a look on how these two different systems are in theory, would have the formal one being organized and generally stratified with a hierarchical structure and clear different units with clear roles. And on the other hand, we will have the informal systems with no structure whatsoever and with a complex feedback loops within it and no such hierarchical structure and no clear definitions on the roles of who that was. And in the middle of all that, we have lots of human needs. So from the very beginning, from the very early response on food, water provision, medical services, or rescue, shelter, and then other needs that might appear in the longer term, such as electricity, houses building, or legal support. All these needs should be covered, and all these needs try to be covered by both the formal and the informal system, with different by different processes. Well, these are the hotspots, as we call them, or where are we doing our work right now. We selected 3 cases to start with. The first, Kathmandu, Nepal, the second, Sendai, Japan, and the third, Metro Manila in the Philippines, which is what we are going to go this year. We haven't started yet. So today I'm focusing in Sendai and Kathmandu. Well, Sendai, on the one hand, is a Japanese city located in the north of Japan. It's the capital city of Miyagi Prefecture, and it has approximately 1 million inhabitants, and is very exposed to earthquakes and also to tsunamis, as we all know. Kathmandu is the capital of Nepal, as we know. It's also 1 million inhabitant city, and it is as well highly exposed to earthquakes. We decided that these 2 cities are similar in size and similar in exposure terms, but absolutely different in socioeconomic and political terms. So that will give us the opportunity to study these informal networks and their very different contexts. In terms of the disaster in Sendai, we showed the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami that occurred in 2011 with a magnitude 9.0. It was one of the major disasters in Japan in the last century, unfortunately over 50,000 casualties, well, over $300 million cost in losses, and of course, unvaluable immaterial losses in the whole region. On Nepal and Kathmandu, we selected the Gorga earthquake occurring in April 2015 with a magnitude of 7.8, but very, very destroying because of all the aftershocks and, of course, the infrastructure and all the other conditions in the city. Over 8,000 casualties, estimated in 3 million displaced. These numbers are always very tricky, but in any case, a major disaster as well. But they are both sort of comparable in terms of the catastrophic magnitude. For each case, we conducted a different campaign because the civil conditions require so. In Kathmandu, we worked with a local research team called Square One. They are Nepalese, and they conducted a survey across all the districts that we were piloting in Kathmandu. House by house, they were going directly interacting with the household on a voluntary basis, and we collaborated at the same time with another research on energy supply after disasters. That was very useful, and I thank all the people from here. And the aim in Kathmandu was to identify and map all the informal networks that were activated just after the Gorga earthquake. So that would be immediate response. On the case of Sendai, we were there, our team, in this case, we conducted interviews at 2 levels. On the one hand, to formal institutions, including both international organizations and government, and on the other hand, grassroots organizations and the community. In Sendai, we wanted to have a broader understanding of the informal networks' role and behavior and evolution from response to the recovery phase, because Sendai occurred a bit of more time ago, so we could kind of track those networks over time. And then in the Philippines, which hasn't been done yet, we aim to also to make these interviews to formal and informal institutions, because we found that very useful. And we are also including this time activists and academic community because they volunteer to take part on this. And we want to have a better in-depth analysis of how the informal networks emerge and the role and the potential for preparedness and not only for response and recovery. I'm going very fast for these, but just so you know that our modus operandi on the field is always to contact a lot of networks there. So we spend a lot of time before we go to the field just engaging all kind of agencies and actors. And this is the case of Zendaya. I'd be happy to give more information by any of you by email if you're interested in that. Now, the research on the case of Nepal in Kathmandu for the role of informal networks in disaster response. We thought this will be the informal network universe, sort of. On the yellow circles are all the different communities that we cover, that we pilot, and the red spots will be the informal institutions, the NGOs, clubs, temples, Wuti, schools, what else? Family hubs and neighbors hubs as well. So all these are kind of the core of the informal, that informal universe. And the links, the white links, represent a connection between the household and that informal actor. That connection could be a provision of any kind of need because they're not differentiated here. So that could be food, water, shelter, or medicine, and any kind of need, as I said. Then, if we made an analysis on the weight and we try to dig a bit more in the skeleton of that structure, we can see here a bit better that the government here and the international NGOs did play, of course, a major role in the provision of these needs. So they are connected to most of the communities, and they provided many needs, especially in the immediate response. However, what we can see is that all the informal actors are in the periphery, and we have a lot of them. Some of them we cannot even see them, and they create a redundant system. So they kind of reach where the formal institutions can't, and they provide kind of a safety net, which is quite, which we all know, but it's nice to see in an analytic way. I brought today a case to have a better idea of a specific need because we're mapping these needs one by one. It's taking a bit of time, but this is the case of shelter. So in this case, each connection represents the access to shelter and who provided that. Again, the yellow circles are communities and the purple are the providers. We can see different sizes of the circles according to the weight, the percentage of that need covered. So in this case, NGOs, international NGOs, and government made up to 51%. However, neighbors, local clubs, friends, health workers, private parties, relatives, local NGOs, goodies, other religious organizations, and schools, and self-help support groups, they made up to the other half of that need.
Yeah, I have a question. So, I want to understand better how you identify the connection, meaning that, for example, is it a one-day connection, two-day, for example, if you ask me the question, where do you get your shelter support, and they say that we get it from there, do you go and check also these nodules? I mean, did you do any double check, or is it based on self-declaration that they identify these connections?
We trust that
Give it a rest. Which is fine. Do you have a standardized identification of connection? What counts as connection, for example?
in different surveys and questions in different places. In this case, we ask need by need. Sorry. Oh no. So in this case, the questionnaire was based on very simple questions on who do you reach for X and Y. The questionnaire was checked by the Nepalese researchers. So because it also went to any kind of member of the community, it has to be very easy to understand. So we would go need by need. Could you please let us know who you reached for water supply after the earthquake? Who do you reach for food? Who do you reach? And that was in this case, as I said. Sorry. We have. Okay. Can you hear me better? Should I carry on? Okay. Okay. This is another kind of a snapshot again of the shelter, and in this case we. Okay. Should I say? Okay. I hope that everyone can hear me. Yeah, this is another output of the analysis, and in this case we are trying to test different clusters to understand better why some people reach different organizations. So in this case, we have clusters from different districts, and we haven't finished yet the causal analysis behind that. But we suspect that there might be some more complex reasons related to the vulnerability of these communities, the isolation in both geographical terms, but also maybe social terms. And we are partnering right now with an anthropologist based in Nepal to have a better understanding of why some clusters might rely more heavily on these informal networks than others. And this is another output, and I don't want to spend more time into this because I think it would be repetitive, but it's just to give you an idea that the nice thing about this method is that once you map all the actors and links, you can perform different analysis on different indicators and try to understand the problem from different kind of entry points. But yeah, we are working in a paper right now, and hopefully in a few months we will have something that we can share with all the interested parties. Then in the case of Sendai, as I said, we try to understand the evolution of those networks over time and the role in recovery, and we found three very interesting results. One is that networks seem to be specialized, both by population group and also by activity or human need. So some networks will attend specifically, will take care of foreigners or isolated people or elderly, and they will also focus in a specific stage or activity within the recovery. So that would be cleaning of the crops, for instance, that was an important activity. Other networks will be facilitators that were really interested. So networks just connected the formal tissue with the community. Other will help in family education. Hello? Okay. Then another interesting result is that from the evidence that we gathered from those communities, it seems that after the disastrous strikes in Sendai, the number of networks increased very rapidly, over 200 they estimate. But after the peak of the first 6 months, they gradually start to decrease, and they keep decreasing during the recovery. That will be a time lapse of about 3-4 years now. But interestingly, and this is what we are really keen in getting better,
the final number of networks seem to be higher than the initial one. So that would tell us that, at least in Sendai, it seems that they have a positive increment on the community networks and tissue in terms of not only disaster response and resilience, but even maybe a bit of more cohesion. But all this is very preliminary and premature, but it seems that it could be the case. And then our last result from Sendai is something that we want to try to test in the Philippines, is that it seems that these informal networks might appear by different processes according to their origin. So some of them might be pre-existent networks. One type is what we call the tree type. So they are very well established institution, informal but institution anyway. So let's think in a temple, for instance. So they have their own structure and their own links. And when a disaster strikes, they also take a role in the disaster. But more than nothing, they were assisting before and they will be assisting after. Then we have something that is like evolutionary networks. They assist before the disaster. This is the case, for instance, of a woman NPO that we interview in Sendai. They assisted before the disaster, and they took care of women in Sendai, women's rights and access to work. But after the disaster, they decided to take a role as well in disaster response and recovery, and they created different branches within their institution to attend specifically disaster. So now they have this side of their work that is focused, very well established in empowering women and elderly women in disaster response. Then we have the networks that appear just after the disaster. They do not exist beforehand. One is kind of the model of the butterfly, because they start small and they evolve kind of quickly. This is the case of an NGO called We Were There that were born in a disaster, and they were funded by a group of students but also volunteers. And they started very small, just taking care of cleaning and helping elderly people. But they were so enthusiastic and they attract so many people that they created a major organization of thousands of people, informal, and then they established themselves as an NGO. And the last one is one type that we really like. We call them the mushrooms. They are sporadic. They just appear just after the disaster and they disappear. They are so important. We have tons of cases in the shelters in Sendai, and all the refugee centers and all the areas where people reunited. We had these cases of people saying, "Oh, let's get together to get food. Let's get together to give people massages." And they made an amazing job, especially in the first 6 months in these shelters. So the preliminary conclusions that we have right now is that informal networks do play a critical role in different contexts, even bigger than we initially thought. And it doesn't matter the political or the socioeconomic context or circumstances, they do play that major role. Like in Japan, many people thought that we will find less evidence, and it was absolutely the opposite case. Then we also found that the advantage of these informal networks is that they are really flexible and very adaptable, and that's a major asset in case of in the disaster response, because they know what the community needs. They know faster and better that the external organizations can know, because they are part of the community and external organizations are not. And also because they don't have the structure of sometimes of the government, they can react and do things that might be illegal, but it doesn't matter because they are not an institution. Then we want to make more work in informal, formal contact points, and those individuals and organizations that seem to work very well across the two kind of tissues, and how they can provide, maybe they can be really helpful in preparedness. And also we want to understand better how can we work with these informal networks before any disaster happens, even in areas where a disaster hasn't happened, because we know that in Sendai, for instance, or in areas that have been stricken by a disaster, people are very aware and very sensitive, so it might be easier to engage with these networks. But in other areas that they haven't been exposed to a disaster, how can we work and how can we identify and detect these informal networks and create this safety net and enforce it before the disaster arrives? Well, the next fieldwork campaign, as I said, is in the Philippines. In April, we are also stopping by Japan in the second round because our partners invited us there, and we want to share our results and hopefully integrate their views, because they have been working there for a long time. So we want to double check that things that we're finding make some sense. And that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is extremely exciting and important, I think. Really very interesting. Are there any questions on participants online? Let's start with the online questions first.
You want to pull down the chat for
Yeah.
a moment? If there's anybody who's just wrote it to you and not to everyone.
Okay,
Up here on the right.
okay.
Where's the chat?
Hi everyone. If you have any questions, please unmute your computer or phone, or you can also type it on the chat box. Okay, go ahead, Leslie.
Hi, this is Leslie, and I work with the Latin America and Caribbean team and the Haiti team. So I'm really grateful to listen in on this and see some of this evidence that I think firmly supports a lot of what we know in the Red Cross intuitively. And I would say specifically in Haiti, we have invested a huge amount in CBOs, in these community-based organizations, which are frequently very informal, extremely informal, sometimes very small. And in working with these organizations, it's actually very hard for us to capture what the real value added is. How do we actually measure the investment and the payoff of the investment? So we haven't even attempted to really do that from a disaster risk management and disaster preparedness perspective. And what you're presenting here gives us, I think, some ideas about how we might be more purposeful in all of our programming in terms of working with informal networks, or at least, doing some of our preparedness programming and even our response activities taking into account informal networks. So this is just really interesting work. Again, it validates a lot of what we know intuitively, but have a very hard time measuring. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. That's so good to hear, and that's definitely our intention. I think that, as you said, everyone that works in the field kind of knows this intuitively, but it's just very tricky to generate some evidence, and we are really thrilled to engage. We have had the support of some individuals in the Red Cross from the very beginning, and we are really keen in engaging more with any humanitarian agency that is currently trying to generate more evidence on this. We are always very, very happy to panel and to use. We have, I think that as researchers, we have something that maybe you lack, and it's time. I did not work as a researcher before, and I never had the time to do this kind of analysis. And I think that it's very important to it's fundamental actually to create more a responsive mode from academia, so we can actually integrate the work that you are doing right now, the data you are having right now, and the things that you think, oh, actually, Rocío, this is interesting, but we think that these will be even more interesting, and we are always really keen in getting this feedback. So thank you very much.
Okay. Anyone else? Any questions from the WebEx participants? Again, you can unmute yourself, or if you prefer, you can type in your question. All right. I think, yeah, Sandra and John Park, yeah, they are. All right.
This is Sandra speaking here.
Okay,
Can you hear
great.
me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Sandra. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm really sorry because I only was able to manage to join the meeting later, because of technical issues, and I couldn't hear you in, but thank you very much indeed. The part that I've seen was really interesting, and I look forward to seeing the full presentation. As you say, operational research for us within the Red Cross, and here I'm talking on behalf of the Federation and the Shelter Department in Geneva. We do have, of course, this is something we never have really the time to capture, to monitor, to go back to places, to understand what's going on. To some extent, real-time evaluations capture a bit the kind of where we're heading towards, and having quick data and information is sometimes, of course, of crucial importance, but also looking back on disasters. And I missed the part of Kathmandu, but I looked at the Japan one, and it's very interesting to look how indeed data tracking from one place to another also affect. For us, it's a way to capture where people are going to and how are they moving, because of course urban dynamics, as we know, are a very fluctuant one and very volatile. So capturing that in terms of mapping, in terms of population movement dynamics, is something which is critical to foresee, to make scenario planning, because ultimately for us, within our aim to support populations, that's very relevant. I'll look forward to see other investigations that the Department of Science have been doing. I'm not sure we're aware of all the research work that you've been doing, Rocío. So indeed, it's something where I really am a strong believer in that part of. On your side, you want, of course, data that are real case. Looking at where disasters strike and looking at something which is which is coming from real scenarios and not virtual ones. And for us, it's critical to have some research going on while we are concentrating on, of course, the kind of response mode and recovery after that. So, so thank you very much. I just said I wanted to chip in to have a better overview of what your research unit was doing, and thank you to Ainur for organizing these kind of events, because they bring us forward in terms of cross-learning and fertilizing each other's work as well, of course.
Thank you so much, Sandra. That's really encouraging to hear. I will be very happy once we publish some publications. We want to do different things, not just academic papers, but something also more, eatable. So once we have the first ones, I will be very happy to distribute it and to keep in touch and engage with all of you, with all of the people within the Red Cross and beyond that might be interested. We are also being invited to the next United Nations platform for disaster risk reduction in May to present some of these evidence on the science side. So we will be preparing some material for that And again, we'll be very happy to keep you posted.
Thank you so much. Sure.
Also ask one question. So you were mentioning that in the Philippines, you're actually going to strive to look more for the preparedness aspects as well, where I think mostly, as you mentioned, it was mostly focused on response and recovery right now. Kind of, how do you anticipate that working out, or kind of what are pieces? Because I think when you talk about response and recovery, you know, the needs that people had, why they connected with the informal institutions or even formal ones, maybe a little bit more easy to define, right, or more clear, where in preparedness terms, you may not even know how these connections may actually be able to help you in case something should happen. So how do you think about approaching the preparedness side?
That's a very good question. We are absolutely fascinated by the whole process, and I have to say that we are the worst researchers because we have no plan whatsoever. We are the team I'm working with have engaged with the communities that work in Metro Manila with fragility issues. And we decided to cover other dimensions rather than just disaster related. So poverty, crime, many other issues that are very important in Metro Manila and that are really critical as well. And as we know, they are underlying factors for quite a bigger vulnerability of these groups. We thought that by hearing from them why rely on others, informal networks, for different activities in different areas of their life, we might have a sense of this kind of invisible skeleton that exists there. And from there, we can understand as well, because they have, in Metro Manila, they have a lot of kind of micro disasters. They have a lot of floods and things that are not really huge, but for them they are disruptions. So they have this kind of disruptions maybe 2-3 times a year. So they do have some networks that are specifically activated when they have any kind of event like that. And we want to, we are interviewing all these communities and organizations right now before we even design a questionnaire to try to, as you say, to try to define to which needs or which kind of dimensions of people dependence, because at the end of the day, it's relying on each other, we can look at better for the case of preparedness. But I'm so sorry, I don't have a better answer.
But yeah, I think that's really interesting because it's kind of, looking back, it's always the question, what preparedness actually would have to help, or where, what activities could have help, what connections, etc. So exploring that a little bit more, I think that, it'd be really interesting to learn more about it.
Thank you.
Sure, maybe just to pick up, and I guess Einar asked about giving a quick update about a project we have where we're looking at tools really around helping to connect cities and communities around preparedness and around resilience, looking particularly at coastal cities. But I guess it's fascinating to hear the discussions, and I think the points that that Leslie raised around how can research help us validate like our intuition, I think is one important stream. I do think there's a stream too that's around, are there tools and approaches that we can take from the work you're doing too that we can apply more directly? I think even Karen's question around how do we apply these in preparedness, like even thinking about having more information around the range of organizations that get involved in response and recovery ultimately, and being able to talk to organizations pre-disaster, but to talk about contexts where we know, or could cite statistics or information around the reasons other organizations get involved and the likelihood, and be able to present that back. It'd be interesting to see too how that might influence, if we approach groups that are working on conflict or working on environmental issues, but just saying like in these other contexts, like the Sendai, where you have a catastrophic disaster, organizations just like yours, play these, crucial roles, and just having that kind of discussion with organizations ahead of time would be really interesting. And I think it's a good way to think too, like how can we take some of the work you're doing and bring it back into our practice more directly. I think the project we have, we're currently looking at developing a couple different toolkits, like one around looking at citywide assessment, like how can we look at community resilience across the city, And certainly some of the analysis you've been doing around trying to map informal networks. It'd be interesting to see, if you have suggestions around approaches that worked on for that kind of analysis and mapping in your context, and whether you think those could be practical. Like, what would be the most practical ones for agencies to use from your experience? It would be really helpful. And then we do have another toolkit piece around coalition building. We're really, trying to think about what are the diverse stakeholders we can bring together to really look at community risk and community resilience within cities. And I think your work too is showing the huge diversity, of concerns, and the way people interact through existing groupings is really important. And again, we have a good intuition for it often that we try and incorporate, but I think having more specific kind of analysis that we can really even walk through with communities and show how it works somewhere else and get their ideas around how that may be relevant and applicable in their own environments. But these two pieces of work, I think Einar asked me to talk about a little bit just because they're really things that we're just starting to, like, we have a couple of consultants working with us. The idea is to have kind of drafts of these toolkits in mid-March to do some testing with in trainings in Indonesia and Vanuatu. I think we'd love to kind of interact a little bit more too around what work can we draw into that. For other people on the call too, I don't know, Sandra, Jung Park, even Leslie too, if you guys have suggestions of things you think we should be thinking about or incorporating. We have had a working group that we started when we first were doing the selection around the consultants, and we're just about to kind of go back out to the working group and ask for some review on the initial inputs the consultants are giving us. But really interested in, how can we think about an evolving toolkit, both on the assessment side and on this coalition building side, that we can draw different tools into, hopefully some of which we'll have going into mid-March, but other ones maybe we'll be adding over time. But yeah, we think it's a good opportunity. And I think for the Red Cross too, there's so much experience, from like Leslie's experience with the Haiti program. And it really is interesting to see what we can learn from our recovery efforts, where we get these opportunities to work more intensively. And often with, obviously organizations and people that are quite motivated because the disasters already happened.
Yeah.
But thinking about, what can that really teach us, as Karen, highlighting too around the preparedness context, and, that we know those motivations will still develop, and if we can find ways to tap into them earlier. But yeah, it'd be great to see what kind of thinking of the research and the practice linkage is, really two-way, and how can we make sure we're building, strong linkages with the work your team's doing. It'd be great.
That would be great. We'll be very, very interested in engaging with the team, with the current coalitions, the work in the Vanuatu Islands. That would be, if that's feasible, that would be really good opportunity.
Okay.
Which was the second, Ian? Which was the second country you mentioned? Vanuatu and
Indonesia.
Pilot? Indonesia. Okay.
Yeah, two cities in Indonesia, Semarang and Ternate, and then in Vanuatu it's a city called Bougainville.
It would always be in urban environments? In urban and suburban environments?
Yeah, trying to look at the whole city in each case. We've already had very interesting discussions with people around when we say coastal, we've talked about the coastal cities in the project, and I think working with the Red Cross partners, there's a tendency to read that phrase too as the coastal parts of cities. So we've been really trying to say we're focused on cities that are on coasts, but looking at the whole city. But the cities too are pretty diverse in size. Semarang is around 1.8 million people. Ternate, we get a little bit different estimates, but between 200,000 and 400,000 people. I think some of this depends on how you count. If you're counting just the core municipal area, or if you're counting some of the kind of outlying peri-urban. And then Bougainville is actually much smaller. It's more on the order of 25,000, 30,000 people. So I think we're really quite interested in how do we see this work being relevant across cities of different sizes. And not that we would have standard approaches, but more we might have some guidance that we could use and adapt and think about, what are the implications of working in these different size cities. But I don't know if you have thoughts on that too, or from the work you've been doing so far, how size changes.
Yeah, no, so I just didn't want to interrupt you because I don't know how we're doing. Thanks so much, Ian, as well for that update and all the information. The coalition work that you are doing, I think, is fascinating, and definitely in the point of different size cities. Yes, of course, it's. I believe it's you have very different dynamics in especially very small size cities and huge cities like Metro Manila. However, I think that the most interesting thing about doing comparative research, and I think that the comparative research probably is the most useful for practitioners like you, and that's why we're trying to select different countries, different cases, is that there are some underlying processes and factors that might appear regardless the rest. So whether it's true that in a big city the informal networks might operate in a different way than in smaller ones, because of the size, because of the number, I would say, and we haven't replicated this method at very small size, but I have worked myself with small size cities before in my past career, and I did find exactly the same kind of reasons why people would rely on the informal side. So I think that creating tools that for the Red Cross and for other organizations in the field that can operate regardless, and then that can be adapted by the teams on the field is a way to go. There is no such a thing as a single tool for all cases, but maybe some kind of guidance and a set of different methods that can be used according to the circumstances, including size.
Thank you, Francis, so much. That presentation made me think a lot of things. I mean, maybe not so now, but at least a few years ago when we start talking about more and more urban settings and working in cities, I got questions all the time about people feeling overwhelmed, there are so many actors, how we can reach them, but it shows that maybe we don't know or we are not connected, but they're all connected. The cities, everybody is very well connected. So that shows it very clearly to me. And maybe I would suggest for a next step, how can we better use of these connections? Now that we see it, everything is connected, we kind of maybe knew it intuitively, but seeing it that clearly, I think maybe will help us to think differently and also to really start thinking about making better use of these connections that already exist. So thank you so much. Thanks everyone. I want to give all the participants one more chance to maybe ask questions or make comments. Anyone on the call? Again, you can speak, unmute yourself, speak, or use the chat box and type.
Well, I think, I can take a couple of more minutes here as I
Sure,
joined in. And also willing to share with you all, of course, we're trying together with AMCROSS and the Federation and all of the member sister national societies who are both either interested or well positioned to work in urban environments to set up an urban collaboration platform, and this platform is both geared towards better learning from each other's work, creating synergies, being able to create some capacity building and to indeed, somehow unveil some of the kind of more innovative practices in urban environments, to be able not just to scale up, but to be better prepared to intervene, not just in the crisis and typical disasters in urban, but also create, of course, what we call urban resilience. So in that, any attempt to also piggyback on operational research that can go from this research on conventional, informal government systems to research that I've been reading recently around the whole of the support to better understand how people cope. What are their safety nets in cities? Who do they rely and back up on? How can we better help, for instance, to provide security of tenure for displaced populations? How can we work on stabilizing situations in urban complex environments, which, for instance, in the Middle East now with hosted communities, returnees, refugees, IDPs, trying to understand what is it that we could could better do rather than the kind of same old logic of distributing items or goods. So somehow the research I've been looking at was also around rental, around, this morning I had an interesting call with the French Red Cross that has done a lot in the Middle East with alliances which were looking at tenure and land occupancy, but also just really admitting also that in this case the French Red Cross and its allies, we're not very well positioned. Sometimes we don't have the legal instruments to understand at country and city level where are the gaps in opportunities to support people in the whereabouts of something very complex, such as land regulations or tenure arrangements for people. So something like that is typically something that is more of the realm of the recovery in both complex urban settings and also sometimes conflict-driven, where we need to ally also with not just, of course, authorities, and sometimes authorities is a very open and vague term because it is driven by different powers, of course, or not just one governance system. Is for us as Red Cross also a way, of course, of sometimes engaging to work with non-authorized actors or with gangs, or and that opens up a whole other way of course, who do you work to, or how to tap into informal governance systems, and also admitting, as I said, a bit where does our work, our knowledge stop, and where do we have to build alliances which will bring us further in assisting populations in and out of disasters. So it's not an easy fit, but definitely also through the Urban Collaboration Platform, I think Ainur, we have a lot to do together to move
we do.
on this. So grateful for this opportunity and really looking forward for future both events and more collaboration on this. Thanks.
Thank you. For anyone who doesn't know, Sandra is your shelter and settlements.
Yes, we're shelter and settlements unit here. It's the
Federation.
Somehow of the International Federation of the Red Cross here in Geneva, and our work with our regional colleagues, of course, and in liaising is to support the national societies of the Red Cross in their work around shelter. Specifically, but in a very open term, and shelter is of course much more than looking at providing emergency shelter during and just after disasters, but it's also having, as you say, this approach towards much bigger shelter stands in a community, is related to infrastructure, is related to the livelihoods of people, and really looking at somehow an arena of much more complex items than just the provision of shelter in emergencies. So yes, the urban and settlements comes as something which is very prominently coming on the scene now, and we need to have better instruments to work in such settings.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for that.
Okay, I guess our time is up, and I don't see any questions on the chat. And I would like to thank so much, Rocio, for coming here, visiting us, and for this presentation. We will be definitely looking forward to hearing the results, and we'll be keep in touch. Everyone, you see Rocio's email if you want to get in touch with her. Also, of course, you can do that. All right, thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ainur.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you for joining us all.